Alrighty, I see everyone popping up on Zoom, so I'll go ahead and get started with some quick announcements before we get into today's panel discussion. So I think the first big one I do want to say is that the alumni reception, Thursday, August 10th, I've sent the email. I reminded folks last week, but just want to highlight that tickets are free. The event is designed to celebrate Pili interns and fellows and all the work you guys have done. And you just need to get your reservation in by August 1st. So that way we have plenty of time to tell the venue how many people are attending. Reach out if you have any questions about that one. The intern summer tracking form is due this upcoming Monday, July 17th. Again, reach out if you have any questions on that one. I've seen a number of folks turning them in, but I understand if there may be some of you folks who are doing non-traditional type work, not direct client service, may have a few questions about how to record things. No problem, just reach out to me and I'm happy to answer those for you. Thanks to all of you who have submitted responses to the intern and fellow spotlight. We did get a number of submissions over the last couple of weeks, but I still invite everyone else. Feel free to submit that for us because we would love to highlight all the great work you've been doing for Pili this summer. One more reminder about the American Constitutional Society's annual Supreme Court term in review. That one is Tuesday, August 2nd, and that one from noon to 1:30 at Mayor Brown. I sent out the address and all the other information for that. It's also on the Pili website, and I'll send another email just to remind folks about that one. I'm not sure when their due date is. However, because it is being hosted at a law firm, you have to register in advance so they can add you to the security list. If you show up on the day of, they probably won't let you in. It also has a limited attendance because it's invited to all members of the American Constitutional Society, not just interns. So if you are interested, please get in a registration as soon as you can. Also, we will be doing virtual sessions for lunchtime for the rest of the summer. There's only a handful left. But just because it is much easier to do these types of things remotely, and I have heard that a lot of offices aren't in person as much as they had been at the beginning of the summer, we think this could be an easier way to get more folks to show up. So once we send out the reminders for the next sessions, there will just be a Zoom link and a virtual registration option only. Now that we have covered that, let's go ahead and get into today's session, which is just a nice panel discussion on the public interest law career path. You will hear from a panel of dedicated public interest law attorneys, and will share their experiences and basically how they've charted their career through law school, early career, any job transitions, just kind of how they've found their way in the public interest world. So our panelists today are Aya Arnea, Assistant Corporation Counsel with the City of Chicago, Martin Cozzola, Staff Counsel at Impact for Equity, and Kimberly Mills, Assistant Public Defender here in Cook County. So Kimberly is running just a touch behind. One of the fun things about being an attorney, especially a public defender, is clients will come in and they'll take time a little bit more than we have planned. So as soon as she comes in, I'll go ahead and get her up to speed with the rest of the panel, but rest assured, she let me know she's on her way. So with that, I will sort of get into the initial questions with our current panelists and we'll kind of go from there. So I'll start with the two panelists who are here. Please give a brief introduction, talk about your current role, how you've kind of how you transition into it, and sort of highlights of kind of what your day-to-day looks like. And I'll let you two choose who wants to start that one.
Sure. So I'm Aya again, and like already said, I work for the city's law department in the appeals division. So we handle appeals, both prosecuting and defending appeals from all the divisions of the city's law department. So everything from tort cases, civil rights cases, building code violations. I've been there for since last November. Before that, I worked at the Illinois Appellate Court, both as a research attorney and then as a judicial law clerk for about over 9 years. And then before that, I was a fellow at what is now known as Impact for Equity, actually, where Marty works, where I worked on public housing and public education issues. And for anyone who's local, I went to DePaul for law school. I guess just some highlights from my day-to-day. It's a lot of, I would say kind of strategy and then research and writing. Most of the day is spent figuring out what arguments to raise on appeal, and then researching and communicating those clearly in a brief. So if anyone has more specific questions on what that looks like, I'm happy to go into further detail, but that's me.
Excuse me, Marty Cazzola. I am staff counsel at Impact for Equity. Up until 2-3 months ago, we were known as Business and Professional People for the Public Interest, or BPI for short. I have been at Impact for Equity since September of last year. That feels right. Prior to that, I was a staff attorney at Chicago Volunteer Legal Services and then supervising attorney there. I started as a foreclosure mediation attorney and then did some foreclosure litigation, and then took on a couple different projects that CVLS is kind of a member of a larger cohort of legal aid organizations. The Illinois Armed Forces Legal Aid Network, and the Cook County Legal Aid for Housing and Debt initiative, a COVID initiative focused on evictions and consumer debt issues that arose from the pandemic. So I did a lot of direct legal services for about 7 or 8 years, always with the goal of heading into policy work, and kind of had the right opportunity to do that starting in September. I'm on the housing team. My day-to-day work, I'm still learning. It's a lot of research and conversations with folks who do the work I used to do. So I've been kind of doing a sustained outreach and conversation campaign with a lot of the fair housing centers throughout Chicago and the suburbs, talking to them about their day-to-day work. I've never handled a fair housing case myself, so learning a lot about what works and what doesn't with the state, the city, and the county's various investigation and enforcement mechanisms, seeing what potential holes might exist. This is kind of one example of things that I've been working on, holes in protections for groups that face housing discrimination, what sort of holes might exist, and then starting now to try and build a little more of an advocacy campaign on how to potentially fix any holes that we might find. So it is very different from what I did for 7 or 8 years, which was a lot of client phone calls, appearing in court, and drafting briefs, complaints, etc. But it's certainly interesting. I have yet to have 2 weeks that look the same, so I'm having trouble describing my day to day. But it is it's a lot of reading, a lot of learning, and I did get to do in the fall or maybe the early spring some actual legislative advocacy around state law that encourages development of affordable housing in communities outside the city of Chicago. And I'm hoping to get more involved in future legislative campaigns like that. And yeah, I am very talkative. So if you are not going to give me a time limit, I'm going to talk forever. I should say I was a 2014 PILI intern at Chicago Volunteer Legal Services. Some of how I ended up there as a staff attorney after graduating from law school and taking the bar was that a job opened up at just the right time. So I started immediately after taking the bar exam at CVLS, and that was the same place that I was an intern.
Well, that's good. I think it shows that the path to wherever you go can be a little bit less than linear. But I do want to touch on that because, Marty, you brought up a lot of good points on how you went from more of direct litigation to more policy. So I just kind of want to ask, at what point did you figure out that you kind of wanted to do that transition over there? And kind of was it more of just the timing worked well with the opening, or did you kind of work toward that knowing that you were looking for an eventual job opening?
Definitely the second one. When I interviewed for my PILI internship, I told my eventual supervisor that my end goal was to work in policy, but given that my background was in humanities or whatever, writing papers in college, not hard sciences, not policy, and that I was in law school, I figured the best way to come at that was to do at least 5 years of actual direct representation, just to see what sort of patterns I was noticing with housing issues. So I ended up being there for 7 years, so longer than intended, but I liked the people I worked with. I liked the work I was doing, and kind of really wanted to make sure that when I made the jump to policy, I wasn't going to be just as lost as I would have been as a fresh attorney. So it was kind of the right time, and also predestined. That's too pre-planned. There we go. That's a better way to put it.
It does feel like you have to plan a bit more, and we'll get into kind of the planning process for kind of how to chart your own career. I do want to ask one for you, Aya. What specifically made you look into the job that you currently do now with the city of Chicago? Was there something specific, or kind of a similar, kind of a good opportunity opening up at kind of a good time in your career?
Yeah, well, like I said, I'd clerked for my judge for, I'd been at the court for a total of over 9 years, which felt like a long time to me, longer than I had initially thought it would last, but I really, really liked it. I really liked the job. And then when my judge said that she was going to retire, it kind of made me think like, all right, now's kind of a chance to think about what I want to do. And I really enjoy the appellate process. It's, kind of nerdy like I am. So I looked for jobs where I could continue to do that kind of work. And there was an opening with the appeals division for the city. And I talked to someone that I knew who worked there. She made it sound great. I applied and got the job, and I'm really, really happy there. It's everything I liked about clerking, but with more like people, because you are getting, there are meetings with, strategy meetings, there's more people around to ask for ideas. So it feels like it's kind of everything, it's like plus what I was doing. So it's been great.
That's good. That's good to know. I'll go back to you and I'll kind of just work down. Are there any kind of myths or beliefs about public interest law jobs if you found to be false from your experience thus far? I'll give it to either of you if you can think of anything like that.
I'll pass it.
Okay. I mean, I think like you can make a living,
Mhm.
like that's a big one. And, I'm married, I have 2 kids, and it is financially possible. It's going to take me several more years to pay off my loans. Like that is a real thing. But it is very possible to have like a good work-life balance and have a life outside of your job. So yeah, I'd say that's one myth that I have found to not be true. in my
Yeah,
case.
I think that's very well put. I have many friends who are in big law who I like to lightly tease about how well balanced my work-life balance is. I mean, there were definitely times with court cases where there would be a filing deadline and things would come up, and suddenly it's 11 p.m. the night before a brief is due, and I'm still working on it. But those experiences were few and far between. Generally speaking, everyone is very aware that part of the work we do and being compensated at not a $300,000 a year or $400,000 a year rate means that you are not expected to be on call 24/7 and to get calls over the weekend and late at night with things that are on fire that need to be dealt with. So that's really nice. On the student loans piece of it, I think one piece that, so I am in year 8 of 10 of public service loan forgiveness. I think a lot of conversations that happened almost for the first 10 or 12 years of that program's existence, were that it wasn't a real thing and like was kind of never going to happen for anyone. For anyone who is doing this and not aware, public service loan forgiveness is a program that was started or created, I believe, under George W. Bush to, if you work 120 months, or 10 years in public service law or just at a nonprofit, a 501c3, your student loans, assuming that you're making payments as required and they are federal loans, they are all going to be forgiven. I think there was certainly a lot of perhaps intentional red tape that was around the program, especially in the early days of it. And it's true that a lot of applications failed for reasons that, like I said, perhaps it was intentionally designed to not actually be achievable. But there have been, I think, surprisingly, some of the temporary COVID waiver stuff that happened in the waning days of the last administration. And under the Biden-Harris administration, a lot of folks are seeing their loans actually forgiven. So it is a program that does work as intended now. And I go on my student loan services website and I'm able to see how many of my payments I've made that do count. And it is all of the ones I've made and all of the ones during COVID that I was not required to make. So I think that there are a lot of outside of this world, there are a lot of people who think that the program isn't real, but it is. So that is one thing that is really making it possible to have a work-life balance that isn't just sitting at home. Because I'm able to make minimum payments on my loans and also not make the $300,000 or $400,000 I talked about earlier, and still survive and have free time and enjoy myself. So I think that's a big plug for public service loan forgiveness.
Yes, I was going to have a specific question on that one and experiences, but I think that's a great primer for it. And it is, even myself, I was in private practice and came back to the public interest world. That program makes it easy to take a bit of a pay cut and also the work-life balance. I can even plug that myself, that there really are a few moments where there's like, hair on fire type of things where you kind of have to work late, and all my big law friends. And when I was in big law, those late nights are very common. So it is kind of you get what you pay for or get what you get paid for. And so you have to kind of think of the balance between your work life as well as how much of the finances are an appeal or a draw for you.
I will just say, I think it's amazing that they've got rid of all the kinks. I graduated in 2010, and I think they have rearranged or redone the payment options. But to get public loan service forgiveness, when I even just a few years ago, they combined your spouse's income with yours unless you file taxes separately, which made it financially impossible for me to have federal loans anymore, and I had to refinance them. I just wasn't making any progress. So it's not a perfect program, but I think they've improved it in ways that you can make it work for you, or find an accountant friend who can help you figure it out. But I think it's gotten a lot better.
In my law school, very helpfully, the month of graduation had a session on how to make sure your paperwork is in order, so that when you enter repayment, you are from jump, all your payments are qualifying. It doesn't change the mechanics of the joint married filing jointly problem, but that was really helpful. I think I had colleagues at my last job who did not go to that session, or maybe their law school did not have that session. And I think that it set me up so that from my first payment, everything was counting. So to the extent that you can have that stuff counted, or you're curious about it, make sure you go to whatever sort of session your law school is going to have.
Absolutely. And I just want to welcome in Kimberly. I explained to everyone earlier that one of the things about, being a lawyer is sometimes client things take a little longer than expected. Just being flexible is part of the job. And That's even beyond being a public interest attorney. So I just want to give you an opportunity to just talk a little bit about your current role at the Public Defender's Office and kind of how you got to that role. And then we'll just keep going from there. So yeah, no worries.
Okay, sure. So I'm sorry, I'm so late. So my name is Kimberly Mills. I am a public defender with Cook County, and I'm in their felony trial division. That's my current assignment. So the cases that I handle range everything from like felony retail theft to attempt murder. Prior to that assignment, I was in our family defense division, which is civil. And that's where I represented parents who were accused of abusing or neglecting their children. So there aren't criminal penalties. The penalty could be that you lose your children. And I've been there since May of 2019, and I love it. Prior to that, so I guess my path, I always wanted to be a public defender. I knew that was kind of like, I don't know, it was just in me. But I did start actually in education law, which I really, really liked. At the time, it was LAF. Now it's Legal Aid Chicago. And I kind of just, every path that I had planned out did not work. And so I ended up at some point just kind of going with the flow and just following interests and opportunity, and just kind of saying, okay, this isn't where I thought I would be, but it's where I ended up. And so I was in special education, and then I did kind of criminal records relief, so post-conviction work, and then made it back to the public defender's office.
Thank you. And so we're gonna go to, I kind of want to just know about y'all's experience with the public interest law community, from law school internships or anything like that, all the way through your current role now. I'll just start with you. I kind of rolled there and just kind of speak about your experience with it and the unique parts of it that you do enjoy.
I felt really fortunate that DePaul had a very strong public interest, like, I don't know if it was a department, but like, part of the law school. And they made a lot of great connections to help students work, get public interest experience during law school. So I worked at the public guardian's office when I had a 7-Eleven license. I worked at another nonprofit. And that was great for figuring out both like what I want to do and what I did not want to do. And like one thing I learned is that I do not want to be in court every day. I am terrified. So I knew that coming out of law school. And I think as a law school graduate, I think the public interest community in Chicago is amazing. Anytime I've reached out to someone to ask a question about a job or what their path has been when I've been kind of at a transition point, everyone I've talked to has been extremely open and very, very helpful. And the DePaul Alumni Network has been great for that. For several years, I was part of a network called First 10, which is a network of public interest lawyers in their first 10 years of practice. Met a lot of people that way. So yeah, I would say it's very welcoming and it's been invaluable.
I grew up a little bit in this community. My dad was an attorney at Chicago Legal Aid Organization. So I knew very early on how amazing the attorneys are who work in civil legal aid here in the city of Chicago. And knew I really wanted to be a part of that once I kind of knew I was gonna try and be a lawyer. I think to a certain extent, those are mostly people much older than me, because my dad's much older than me, or is much older than me. As far as building my own community here, I think a lot of how I did that was, and I'm sorry to be saying this, given that Artie just announced that these will all be virtual going forward, but was coming to a lot of lunch sessions like this. I was going to make a hearty plug for coming to the rest of them in person. But I know it's a totally new world. It's been a new world for 3 years. I think one of the things I really missed a lot during the pandemic was getting together with folks from other organizations, whether that was fundraisers at other organizations that I would go to every year, just because I liked seeing people from those organizations, liked the event, or doing things like First 10. So I am currently on the First 10 board of people who aren't loosely in charge. It's a very we call it an affinity group. We are not like a formally incorporated organization or anything like that. We have a very small budget, but pre-COVID we did every winter we had these potlucks, and I was glad to host one. There's about 300 people on the first 10 listserv, and a dozen or so of them would just come over to my apartment, and it's always a different group every year. All people really working to figure out ways to lift people out of poverty through the civil legal system. It's a community that I've really enjoyed getting to build my own little piece of, and also getting to work alongside a lot of the attorneys I grew up knowing. I would say to the people online who weren't able to make it today, and given that everything is going to be virtual going forward, definitely make an effort to come to that event on August 10th, which
I plug that. You taking my lights.
the last 2 years I've gotten to make a speech at the end of it without a microphone, which is always fun. I think we're at a different location that maybe has a sound system.
Mhm.
Yeah. So for the folks who are in charge of the Alumni Council now, they will have a much easier time. But it's a great event. You will get a chance to meet with some of the newer alumni in Pilley's community, and like myself, and then people who did Pilley's 30, 40 years ago. And I would say just if you have a mentor or a Pilley advisee, make sure to reach out to them, because they can be a really valuable connection to the public interest community. I didn't stay in touch with mine because he was at Big Law and we didn't have a ton to talk about. But some of the folks who I have advised over the years are people who I see fairly regularly at Pilley events, and it's always great to catch up with them and to have, we get coffee occasionally, and just kind of see if there are places in each other's careers where we can help each other out. So I think it's really important, especially if you want to work in Chicago and work in public interest, to make sure you're making those connections. And I know it's awkward. I know it's probably something that everyone's career office is like plugging every day, is like network. But like, this is different because these are like-minded people instead of just a connection you need to make another connection to get an interview. There's a lot to do in this community.
I would echo a lot of what they said. Networking, I hate networking. And I just like to put that out there because I feel like that resonates with people. So find a buddy if you can. When going to events, it just makes it easier because then you have somebody to talk to, even if you're kind of like standing in the corner. And then maybe someone who's super chatty will like come up and chat with you. So I always, say that. I would say, some of it will come naturally as well once you're in the Chicago legal aid community. And it's small and everyone kind of knows each other. Like your dad was my boss. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah.
So they're just, everything's all interconnected. So remember, reputation is everything. And you sometimes just have to be brave. And as you're practicing, my partner and I, we had a question yesterday about benefits. So picked up the phone, called a friend who was at Legal Aid Chicago, and I was like, I need to know what's going on with this issue. So some of it will come naturally and you'll build it as you practice, but it's a great community. Find a buddy though, and just say, we're gonna go to X, Y, or Z event.
Absolutely. It makes me a little nervous myself when I would have to network as a law student. You always feel like, I'm making these big asks of folks. But I think even being on this end of networking and then talking with folks more, people love helping out law students. Like, I don't know, I think there's this, I know for me especially, there's this thing where I just love interacting with law students and folks who are like their first year of practice, because I understand what it was like and how it was like felt overwhelming. And I could be like, yeah, it's okay. I still don't know anything all these years in. So it's kind of nice to have just someone nice to talk to, and this community is very welcoming. And I've always found it as a good home, and everyone's always really kind and chill. So definitely encourage it, and also encourage everyone again, August 10th, alumni reception. Great opportunity for networking, and we'll all be in person, and you can bring a buddy to that as well.
Can I add one other thing? Sorry.
Go for it.
Something I've learned recently, take advantage of trainings that are within the community as like another natural way to meet other like-minded attorneys, because then, you have a goal, there's something you're doing, you know, you may have to work with other people, but try and take advantage of trainings that are either offered by your office or that are free. Legal aids, I feel like legal aids are always putting on trainings or clinics, like different things like that. And you may even be able to participate in some of those as law students, so you can get out there and, you know, dabble and see what's going on.
Absolutely. And it's a good reason to stay connected with the folks at the organizations you're currently at. That's a great way to already build in your network that's starting right now. Stay in contact with them throughout the school year. And I was invited to a lot of events as well. And so it's always nice to have that as a pretty easy ask. You already know these folks. You've worked with them for over a month. Just keep in contact and they'll be sure to invite you to many things that happen during the school year. I'm going to ask this one to you, Kimberly, specifically, and then anyone else who may have a response, feel free to jump in. One thing we've talked about throughout this summer is about sort of the emotional impact of doing this type of work. Not every job is going to require that, but I know in the public defender's office, I'm sure you deal with folks who are experiencing traumatic life events and experiencing these types of things. And so how do you practice self-care? And do you have any tips for our listeners about how they can manage that if they happen to get into a role where they deal with a lot more of the traumatic events that their clients may be experiencing?
Yeah, totally. So yeah, clients, you know, they're coming, really, I think in many legal aid situations, like it is a desperate, it is kind of bottom, like just rock bottom moment, whether it's housing, whether you're locked up, you know, just so many different things are going on, things that I can't even imagine. So it is important though to be able to put some boundaries up. And I was terrible at boundaries in the beginning. I feel like you kind of have to figure it out and you realize you maybe get a little too attached to one client and you're like having dreams and nightmares. You're like, oh my God, this is too much. But having boundaries, and what I really mean is being able to kind of turn off your email or like close your computer, not, you know, you may have to put, if your phone will ring to your cell phone, do not disturb from the hours of 6 to 9, right? Just like really setting some strong professional boundaries. And then, you know, finding something fun to do, just that's, I find like completely unrelated, that, you know, where you can just kind of decompress and unwind. Like I don't like exercising, but I do like art. So pottery class, yes. You know, hang out with my kids, yes. But you know, just finding things that fuel you. But boundaries.
Yeah, if either of you have any other inputs from your past roles or current roles, please offer anything you feel would be useful.
I mean, the Chicago Bar Foundation and First 10 maybe. So when you become attorneys, you will have 1 credit of mental health CLE that you're required to do every 2 years. That's definitely not enough. But the Chicago Bar Foundation, usually the way that they help folks achieve that goal is by putting on sessions on vicarious trauma, or there's a less, there's a different word for that phrase now, but I would say go to every session about that you can if you're working in direct legal services. It not only will you learn kind of tools to help you work on putting up boundaries or like working on self-care, given that a lot of the crises that your clients are dealing with are going to start to feel like your own crises. You'll also get to be like in a room or on a Zoom with a lot of people going through similar situations, because this, like I said, this is a great community. And it's really great to be able to just like know that you are not the only person who is who has a client who's facing eviction, and you are very sad and scared and fearful on their behalf, or they're dealing with a custody battle, and you're not alone in feeling like an overwhelming amount of empathy that you don't really have a place to direct. So I think that's a very valuable part of it. And you know, to the extent that doing a mental health CLE or working on self-care via exercise, art, whatever recreational activities you need. Therapy is great. Definitely not something to be ashamed of. This is a high stress profession, and we are frequently dealing with people who are marginalized by society, and it can be really tough to hear those stories day in and day out, and as a result, you're putting your own needs to the side. So definitely a big plug for therapy. Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
I think Marty and Kim covered.
No, that's good. And I believe that it is, I think it's like Chicago Bar Association, but there's one of the organizations here that has like a therapist on staff who was also a licensed attorney. And a lot of times those sessions are offered for free or low cost, especially if you're working in the public interest. I know if your organization's like a Chicago Bar Foundation grantee, you usually get a free membership to the Chicago Bar Association. So all that being said, there are a lot of resources. This is a very stressful career, and we would want folks to turn to more constructive ways of taking care of themselves, as opposed to less constructive versions. So there's a lot more resources. We talk a lot more openly about accessing those resources. And so there's no need to feel a stigma about them, and they're super helpful. So I kind of want to go back to the beginnings of your career, kind of coming out of law school and the hiring process as you experienced it. I do know that a lot of public interest organizations don't make like offers in the way that Big Law does like a year before. And so as folks are approaching graduation, and I don't know if any of you had offers or jobs lined up at graduation, but kind of how did you navigate the job search during your last year of law school, and just any tips or other advice you can offer to folks who will be soon to approach the job market? I'll let whoever wants to start with that one go for it, and then we can just kind of pass it on down the line.
I'll start. I didn't have a job when I graduated law school, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I mean, I knew broadly what I wanted to do, but none of the feelers I had put out had materialized. I had applied to be, Impact for Equity has a 2-year fellowship, and I had applied. I'd been a Pili intern there. I'd applied, didn't get the job. Happens. And then it turned out they had a last minute opening, and it was like the week after I took the bar exam, and it worked out. And like that is not normal. I wouldn't like recommend that as a job strategy, to like wait for a job to fall out of the sky. But I think, so getting that first job was key. And I would say like now, you know, being more than 10 years out, like I would put like less pressure on what your first job is. Like it doesn't have to be your dream job. It's any job where you can get some good, you know, legal experience, kind of broadly defined, whatever that is. And then after that, it becomes much easier to like go to the next step and the next step. One thing that I kind of ran into, and I don't have a good answer for this, I think it's just something to be aware of, is that a lot of, you know, like Artie said, public interest and government doesn't hire usually in a big class. So it can be a little tricky to find jobs that will hire you before you're licensed, or while you're waiting for the bar exam. There are jobs that exist like this. For example, like there are certain, if you want to work for like a court system or like clerk, often they'll hire you like while you're waiting for your bar exam results. But it's just something to be aware of. And it was very normal when I graduated for people to not know exactly what they were going to do. And it may take a few months, and that can take some planning, and it is stressful. And I wish I had an answer for you. But, you know, maybe one thing is to kind of think about like, you know, talk to as many people as possible in law school, like do some of that really uncomfortable networking, not because you're looking for a job, but just to figure out like, what is the landscape? What are the possible jobs that are out there? So that when you're ready to really focus your job search, you know where to target your efforts and what kind of work you might be interested in.
My journey, a little bit similar in a lot of ways, in that I had applied for a fellowship with CVLS after my Pili summer. It was an Equal Justice Works Fellowship. I believe there will be a session on post-grad fellowships. Like I learned about it at a Pili session. Went back to CVLS, said, I have this project I'd like to design there. Like, great, we'll sponsor you. I went through that entire interview process, and came to a dead end during spring break of my 3L year. And it was kind of like, well, this was like my most promising opportunity, and it's not going to work out. I don't know what to do. And so and also like I graduation, publishing a law journal and studying for the bar, like that's not a fun time to be searching for a job. It happened to be that as like 2 weeks before the bar exam, somebody quit from CVLS, and so there was a position open in the foreclosure practice that they were like, they picked up the phone. They were like, "Hey, we liked you last summer. We worked with you all year on this project that didn't get funding. Would you like to work on this other project?" And so that worked out really well. And I started, like I said earlier, just after the bar exam. So again, not something to count on, but 2 of 3 stories like that so far. So maybe you can count on it. Don't. I think that it's really, I think that the harder thing to do is to find these jobs, because it's not, Kirkland hires 100 attorneys every year and there's like a well-established cycle. What happens more often than not is there is a spot that's open, and you need to know that spot's open at an organization. So finding out where those jobs are posted is really critical. The plug for First 10, that is the group that Aya talked about that I am on the organizing whatever for. It is, in addition to kind of doing loose programming throughout the year, there are jobs posted throughout the year, some of which will say this is an entry-level job, bar admission results don't matter just yet. National Lawyers Guild Chicago chapter also has a pretty robust job listserv. And then also Illinois Legal Aid Online posts a lot of jobs. If you have not created an account there this summer, you should, because it's a wealth of resources about Illinois state law. So I would just make sure that you're checking those things. I think if you're sitting just like refreshing Simplicity every day or whatever it's called now at your law school, you're not going to see the jobs that are in this community, just because by the time they get uploaded to Simplicity, they're already filled. So yeah.
So I did have something, I had a post-bar clerkship, a post-graduation pre-bar clerkship at a public defender's office, which was rare, like very, very rare for the public interest folks. But yes, there are some places that do hire. Our office, actually, if anybody's interested in being a public defender, let me know. We do hire, I guess offers go out at the end of your 3L year. You're given time to study for the bar, and then you come on as a pre-licensed attorney. If you pass, you're a grade 1, which is our entry level. If you don't, our office gives you like another shot. They basically say, go study, and then come back. So there are some out there, and yeah, government, clerkships. And, I also say, I thought it was very boring. Clerking was boring, but even at like the state level, I think people sometimes maybe overlook, because I think sometimes it's like, oh, federal, and like, it's like fancy glitzy glam, and it's like, okay, they're fine, go do that. But also at the state level, I think you can gain so much experience at that level, and there are more opportunities there. Listservs are key. I don't know, one I used to use was PSJD. I don't know if that's still a thing. It's been a minute since I've graduated, but like I think that's great. And that would be probably like in your career office. That was probably the most helpful thing I found from where I went to school in the South. So, but like finding out what those listservs are and finding out about different fellowships and different things like that, I think is a great way to kind of get your foot in the door. But also, unfortunately, public interest, you just don't have that same, and you're just gonna have to kind of tune out the people that are walking around with their offers, and just remember they're gonna have to work a lot and they're gonna be very unhappy and whatever. So just keep that in mind. But it is super hard to tune out that chatter when people around you feel like, you feel like everybody has something set up and you're like, I really just wanna help people, do housing or whatever. So you do have to tolerate a little bit of it, but also I would say, if you can, focus on the bar. If you don't have a job after graduation, you gotta jump over that last hurdle to kind of officially join the club. And then I would say, if you're able to, depending on what your situation is, then I would say hit the ground running. And one other thing, so I have some friends who went to business school, and I think business school, they teach you some very valuable tips. And one thing that a friend of mine, she said that they pushed were informational interviews, and I was like, what is that? But basically, that's kind of like reaching out to people that may or may not know that you find through, I guess, LinkedIn or like different things at organizations that you like, and just kind of saying, hey, I'd love to know more about your job. People love talking about themselves. I think Marty said that earlier. Like, people love talking about themselves, how you got here. If you have time, would love to just chat via phone, whatever. And that's a great way where you can get information without seeming like you're trying to like find a job or what's going on. So, and it's safe. It feels safer.
I just did it like a year ago because I was switching jobs. I didn't know what I was gonna do, and I just would, like, a friend of a friend worked somewhere where I might be interested. They didn't have a posting, but I was like, well, maybe they will one day. Let me just find out what it's like to work there. No one said no. Everyone was more than happy to do it. The other thing I'll just add is if you do want to work in government, often those jobs, it's annoying. They're like, you have to go to that government entity's website. Like, they're not,
That's
they are often not
Yes.
uploaded anywhere else. So like, you make a list of the places where you think you might be interested, and then you just make a habit of like every week, all right, I'm gonna check these 10 places and see if there's an opening. And it feels ridiculous, but like sometimes that's the only way to find out that that place is hiring.
Totally.
I will say just because I did not do a clerkship, there are people at my office who clerked, my last job, who started, I think we all graduated law school at the same time, but they put in 2 years in clerking for a judge in state court at the Daly Center. And I, like, once they got hired, and like, I was like comparing myself to them, I was like, oh, you are a much better attorney than me. Mostly because I think you spend a year or two in a courtroom, you get to see both like the best attorneys and the worst attorneys that Cook County has to offer. And the best writing and probably the worst writing that Cook County has to offer. And you can not only like, you're getting experience working with the judge, but you also get to see like what kind of attorney you want to be, what kind of advocate you want to be. And if you're planning to go into litigation, it's probably an incredibly invaluable experience, even if it is occasionally boring. I would have been bored out of my skull,
Yeah.
I think, but
I loved
also
it.
slight regrets. Yeah.
I'm a criminal defense attorney, I like action
It is
drama,
not,
Yeah.
it is not
the
for
whole thing.
everybody.
It
I
is,
will
yeah.
say that.
Mhm.
But it is super valuable, and let me tell you, when I file motions, like the attention that you learn for detail, you're sending back like summary judgment motions for like pagination issues because they don't comply with court rules, or you know what I mean? Like the things you learn, and you also learn, I think, like this is just echoing like what Marty said, like good firms, not so great firms, like reputation, and judges, they're connected. They love connections. That's how they got on the bench, the whole thing. So it's also, it may not be directly related to, your dreams of being a benefits attorney or whatever it is, but it is valuable.
Because I think the last little bit about this litigation experience at a lot of public interest organizations, sometimes the bench is very shallow, short. The sports analogy is not working. You may be going somewhere where there's a whole bunch of folks who are within their first 2 or 3 years of practicing law, and then like the next most senior person is like 10 or 15 years out and has not been to court in a while. And so you can learn a lot by clerking and then going and being kind of a starting attorney at these organizations. So that is, I think, the skill I missed, is I was mostly being mentored at my organization by people who themselves just a few years prior had been learning from scratch how to be attorneys. So I think it's really valuable, even if I didn't do it. Yeah.
The paths are varied. It's networking. It seems like a very common theme, and just kind of being aware with where opportunities are posted. I do want to take a second. Jack, are there any questions on the Zoom?
Not yet, but I'll add.
No problem. In the room, any questions that anyone has? It's okay if you can't think of any yet.
I'm
Yes.
curious what your guys' passions were in law school and when or how they changed into kind of what you started working in.
Here, I'm just going to repeat it for folks online who may not have heard. The question was essentially, what were the passions that our panelists had in law school and kind of how they've adjusted or informed their career choices at this stage. So, Kimberly.
Sure. So I started law school thinking I was gonna be like an environmental lawyer. I found out we had to go on like a camping trip. I went to Tulane in like the bayou and I was like, absolutely not. Under no circumstances am I going camping to go look at trees. No, not happening. So certain things I kind of was able to check off. I also, some of my internships I hated, which was fantastic because I was able to eliminate like different things that I thought maybe like international law. Didn't really know what it was, sounded really great. I majored in international relations, got there and I was like, nope, this is not for me. I tried, God help me, business and tax at the Attorney General's office. That was terrible for me as well. I was like, oh my God, I'm so bad at this. And like, it just didn't, and like the attorneys around me were so passionate about like tax law. And I was like, absolutely not, like this is so not my jam. So really it was that like I would get these ideas of things that, you talk to people and they're super into like, for me, like criminal defense, I like, it's the greatest thing ever. And so you're like, okay, maybe I'll apply to this office or I'll try X, Y, or Z. And really, you just got to try it and see if it moves your spirit. And if it does, great. If it doesn't, fantastic. Like, I don't think any like clinic, externship, internship over the summer, whatever it is, I don't think any of that goes to waste, even if you realize like, so not for me. So that's how, process of elimination.
Mm-hmm. I will just say that's how I learned I didn't want to be a litigator, was by doing my first internship and doing a litigation project. I was like, this is awful. Get me back to contracts and things that felt more in line with me. So you'll definitely find that the best experience you get is learning that you hate something.
I think I'm mostly doing what I plan to do. I think, which sounds very arrogant. I saw a tweet or maybe a thread the other day that was like I'm an attorney. My job is to wake up every morning and argue for something, and it's somebody else's job to wake up every morning and try and stop me from achieving that. Yeah.
It's great.
That's so true.
And like that is probably the part. Like it's not that I necessarily didn't like litigation or direct client representation. What I didn't like was dealing with other attorneys who or would constantly be like, oh, cool, we're gonna miss that deadline. Are you cool with extending it? We'll give you more time to do your thing. And I was just always like, yeah, sure. Let's, this person's they're not gonna get foreclosed on this week, I suppose. Let's get more time. So that I think was really frustrating and really helped cement my desire to not deal, at least in that environment, directly with attorneys. So it affirmed my commitment to creating macro level widespread policy changes in the housing realm. I should say that I always wanted to do housing. So
When I was in law school and immediately after, I wanted to work on schools, families, something to do with children. I was a teacher before I went to law school. And then I got that job and I really liked it for a while. And then it just, because of the nature of the work, it started to veer into community organizing, which is a great fit for somebody. It was not a good fit just for my personality and what I wanted to be doing. So a friend, this is like some of the networking, right? Just like, it's just a guy I knew, a good friend of mine from law school, worked at the Illinois Appellate Court, and he was like, hey, there's this division you've never heard of. It's called the Research Department. You should go try it. Like, you want to build your legal skills, you want to do more legal writing. And that's how I found out about that job. And it was like kind of just going to be a way station for a little while to figure out like, all right, what am I going to do? And it turned out I just really liked it. So it's not the like issue. I don't work on the issues that I thought I was going to work on in law school, but I really enjoy the day-to-day work. And I, find a lot of meaning out of doing public service. So, every job has its trade-offs. Nothing's perfect. But I'm happy where I landed.
Thank you for that. That is, I mean, I'll just say that I thought I wanted to do transactional work for my entire career. I did it in big law, I did it in-house, which is supposed to be the dream. And then I realized it was, one day it was like, okay, this is just it. I'm just arguing about little sticking points in a contract that's like 30 pages long. And then, I ended up back in public interest. So no matter where you go, it's always interesting to reflect back and see that the path sometimes leads you to the spot you were destined to be in the first place. So just be open, network, and all that fun stuff.
Can I add one quick thing?
Go for it.
As you're looking at like different clinics or externships, try and try something that is transactional. Try like, even if you're not like thinking that would be something you would want to do. So not just subjects, but also the type. Because I do think like litigation, you either love it, like me, I love arguing with other attorneys. Like I love cross-examining cops. It is just like my favorite thing. But like either that's for you or it's not. Maybe you're a passionate writer, you know what I mean? Like so I would test out if you have, like, if your law school has like different clinics, if you can, try and get involved with them. So also looking at what the skills that different opportunities focus on.
Perfect. And so we're about at time, and I want to respect everyone's lunch hour. Is it okay if I provide y'all's contact information for our attendees in case they think of any additional questions?
Yeah.
Okay, so with that, I'd just like to say, hey, give a nice round of applause for our lovely panelists. I will say they're representative of the types of folks you're going to meet in this space. Like we find our passions, we're very passionate about them. And one thing we just all like doing is just talking about how we've gotten to where we got, because I think there's a sense of understanding that it feels scary when you're first getting out into the job world after law school, but eventually you do find your place in this industry because it's a small community, but there's also a lot of opportunities to do great things. And if you're persistent enough, you tend to find the things that fit you well, even if it may be a nonlinear path. So I'll provide the contact info for all of our panelists in case you guys think of any questions. And with that, folks in the room, please feel free to get more pizza. And for those of us joining us via Zoom, thank you so much for your time. And I wish you all a great rest of your day. Thank you.